All right, welcome everyone to our first Capitol Hill Day 2026 and General Advocacy 101 training. We're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this session so that we can share it with everyone afterwards and with those who missed it for some reason. We welcome your participation and really would love for you to have questions and comments. And so we have a formal presentation, but we do encourage you to interrupt the speakers or raise your hand or drop questions in the chat so that you don't have to worry about saving something for the end because it is a little bit of a lengthy presentation. So do please feel free to interrupt our speakers. I want to thank my colleague Yvette Seeger. She's going to be monitoring the chat while I share my screen and facilitating. And so I will stop and introduce the rest of the speakers. I'm Jennifer Zeitzer, the Director of the Office of Public Affairs here at FASEB. But let me turn it over to our Associate Director for Legislative Affairs, who's really in charge here, and that is Ellen Gua.
So good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The presentation we will have today is just the basics. Hopefully, if you've never gone to Capitol Hill or done any advocacy, this will lay the groundwork for you. My co-presenter today is also Allison Hayes. She is a partner at Federal Science Partners. They are our outside consultant and experts in terms of appropriations work. So we will begin. On our first slide, we are going to be talking about, in our agenda, advocacy. We're going to be looking at what, who, why, and how. We're going to take a quick look at the current appropriation status, the new political environment that we're working in. We're going to go over some advocacy principles and talk about Capitol Hill office setup and a few other resources that are available to you as an advocate from FASEB. Next slide, please. So what is advocacy? Well, we are all advocates in our own way, depending on what we care about. So what we're doing here is we're supporting or making recommendations for a particular public policy issue or a particular cause. As an advocate, you can, support a specific bill. You can ask for a certain amount of funding for a particular agency. You can even ask Congress to consider some new idea. Members of Congress are always open to hearing from their constituents, and you are one of their best sources of information, and you are a critical influence as they make decisions. Now, FASEB advocates for these four particular agencies and programs: the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy Office of Science, and the Department of Agriculture's Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, which is a competitive extramural agricultural competitive grants program. We also advocate for the Veterans Affairs Medical and Prosthetics Research Program, which focuses on research that supports the specific injuries and traumas that veterans basically go through. That type of work can translate directly into the general population. And this is the order in terms of priority for FASEB's funding requests. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out for you. Next slide, please. So when it comes to whom do you advocate? Well, here at FASEB, we focus only at the federal level. Of course, there is the state level of government and there's your local level of government. Those are very important too, but depending on the amount of resources, because we are looking at federal programs, we're going to be talking to the two senators and the representative representing you in your congressional district when you go to Capitol Hill. Next slide, please. So why advocate? We want basically to influence Congress, to really, those folks there are able to actually influence the administration. If you don't have a direct contact to the administration to be able to influence them, you can certainly do that through your member of Congress. And the members of Congress also work together to influence the administration. So we are going to be seeking a healthy funding for the biomedical research ecosystem and getting legislation and actually enacted into law and the types of language that we want to see in that legislation heavily depends upon you as a constituent of that member of Congress and your activity throughout the year. This is not a one-time type of activity. Lobbying happens throughout the year, and there are various decision points that you need to be able to impact as you move forward in the process. So we are very happy that you are involved in this process and that you are not giving up your power and your voice to other interest groups that may have contrary positions to your position. Next slide, please. So basically, again, we are going to ask for money to flow for basic research. That is our primary goal when we go to Capitol Hill. And as you do this, you are going to be talking to not only members of Congress, but their staff. Their staff are critically important. They provide a lot of the leverage that that office needs to be able to talk to as many constituents as possible and get an idea of what the constituents are thinking is important this year, what the trends are, what are the major concerns, what really needs to happen. Now, when you go up to Capitol Hill, congressional staff do not expect them to be experts in your topical area. If you're lucky, you will have someone that maybe has a PhD, but most of the congressional staff do not. They are usually undergraduate or law degree or masters of public policy. Some of them may be fellows from another, department of the federal government, and they spend a year or two working for a congressional office or a committee staff. Those are the ones that would really have a lot of more expertise in your issue area. But most congressional staff are generalists, and you have to understand that when you talk to them, you need to speak to them in a way that you would speak to the general public and not use acronyms and assume that they understand exactly what you're talking about. Because we know that science and federal funding for science isn't a well understood topic in general on Capitol Hill. You may be talking to appropriation staff. They will be much more attuned to funding issues because that's really what they are focused on in that office. But you might be talking to maybe, someone that's working in the agricultural space, and health is not their primary issue area. So you will have to be able to kind of blend that information together so they understand what you are talking about. And you're also going to be developing a relationship with that office. So like in any relationship, you have to have more than one touch. So this will be your first touch in terms of an in-person visit. Then you will have a follow-up in terms of emails. You may have another opportunity with another organization that you're a part of to go back to Capitol Hill, or even to send in an email or a call to Capitol Hill, to that office, using our Legislative Action Center. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can even follow up in your district office by contacting the district office and asking to go in and just making the exact same presentation that you made on Capitol Hill. The district offices often have a little bit more time. When you go up to Capitol Hill, you might be very constrained in how much time you have with that particular office. But I have often found that the district office personnel maybe can give you 45 to an hour. So don't be intimidated. It's basically the same process. You just have to ask for the meeting, and we provide you a lot of informational material in order to do that. Next slide, please. So these are some of the ways that you can actually have your voice heard. You may not know the impact immediately about what you've just done, but it makes a difference because we need a groundswell of, information as well as loudness from the constituent community to that office. Members of Congress, their staff are looking at social media. They have their own Twitter pages. They are going out to meet with their constituents back home in their town halls. So signing up for their newsletters is important. That way you'll be able to keep up to see what that office is concerned about, where they have been back in your district. And they will often announce when their town halls are. And this is another opportunity for you to just ask that question of that member of Congress. For example, do you support NIH? Do you know how important it is to the work that we do here in our particular district? So you can give real, local examples when you do this. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of one of our volunteers who actually wrote an opinion piece to a local paper, gathering information on his own to put together why science funding is helping to drive the economy in Virginia. You'll find that particular offices have different, I would say, higher interest areas than others. Some are much more focused on science, some are more focused on economic development. So others are focused more on national security, but science really impacts all of those areas. Next slide, please. So this is where we are in terms of the status of appropriations. You know that we had that 43-day shutdown back in October that basically has backed up a lot of the activities in the agencies. So we are in the current situation that the appropriators in the House and Senate are trying to finish the 9 fiscal year 26 spending bills by January the 30th. That deadline is when the government is no longer going to be funded. So they're trying to get this done and move on into the fiscal year 27 appropriations process and beginning it all over again. Now, we know that the labor HHS bill, which funds the National Institutes of Health, actually came out this week. They are still working on trying to move that bill through the House and eventually over to the Senate and then to the president. Each step of the way, we are watching what is happening. In terms of like Commerce Justice Science Bill, which funds NSF, that one has actually passed the House and Senate and is sitting on the president's desk. So we're waiting for him to actually sign that piece of legislation. And that's the same for the Energy and Water Bill. The particular amounts for NSF, it's $8.75 billion. So you're seeing a compromise between what the Senate wanted to have for NSF and what the House was actually thinking of. So that's basically a $130 million decrease from what NSF got in fiscal year 25. And the Department of Energy, they saw an $8.4 billion amount for their funding request. And that is a plus up from what they got in fiscal year 25. NIH in the labor HHS bill, they have $47.2 billion. That is the bipartisan and bicameral number that has come up between the two bodies and between the two parties. If you exclude the $1.5 billion for ARPA-H, that is the number for just NIH. So you might see different numbers when it comes to NIH, but it depends on how they basically are looking at the funding number. Next slide, please. So our political environment, everyone knows, hopefully, that the very important Office of Management and Budget, which puts out the president's budget, is working on putting out the next year's budget, fiscal year 27. Usually that comes out in early February, but it's usually late. We are expecting that the head of OMB will again be looking at cuts to the federal science agencies, which they tried to have in the past fiscal year. And basically because of the advocacy that was done by not only constituents, by coalitions, and by members of Congress that are hearing from their constituents, that they rejected what the president was trying to do in terms of cutting NIH and NSF and other programs. So moving on to the next slide, please. These are some of the changes that we saw in 2025. And basically, Congress had various hearings when it came to the fact that there were cuts to various agencies. They are looking at trying to understand, who was cut, what their roles were, how the criteria was used in order to determine who got terminated or let go from an agency. That was a lot of the activity that you saw in 2025. There were even rallies in Bethesda, for example, where members of Congress stood up with the terminated employees and other NIH employees, pushing back against the administration when it came to the cuts that were being made. Next slide, please. So FASEB has also been very active, not only in the congressional space, working with the legislative branch, but we've also been working in the judicial branch, participating in the amicus briefs filed in various lawsuits. One of them in particular was the APHA versus NIH. That lawsuit basically dealt with NIH grants and the withdrawing of funding. We saw very recently that there was a stipulated agreement that NIH agreed to, basically to look at those grants that had been, basically the money had been taken away, to use a standardized process that they would normally use to relook at all of those grants. So that was definitely a positive result as a result of, advocacy in the in the judicial branch. And the next slide, please. These are some of the quotes from various people involved in that particular lawsuit, and what they put out in terms of press releases as a result of that particular federal lawsuit. Also, next slide, please. I also wanted to tell you about the Genesis mission. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is the Department of Energy is leading this particular program, but the Undersecretary for Science at the DOE Office of Science is very heavily promoting this particular initiative of the White House. As an appointee, he came from the National Science Board, has a very lengthy background in artificial intelligence, and former IBM executive. But basically, they want to use artificial intelligence. They want to use various data sets from the different scientific disciplines, and they want to train up over 100,000 scientists to be able to do this type of work. And they're using the national labs as a launching point for this. So we're expecting that biotech is definitely one of the areas that the Genesis mission is focused on, but they are also looking at, for example, energy and national security as other areas that they can actually accelerate the pace of science within the next 10 years, doubling the output and the development that can be done using newer methods, a new process. So let me stop here and see if there are any particular questions people wanted to ask me at this point before I turn it over to my colleague. Anything in the chat? Okay. I don't see anything, so I'm happy to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. And as Jennifer said at the beginning, please feel free to jump in with questions as we go. We don't have to wait until the end. What I'm going to talk about a little bit now is bringing it back to the specifics of advocacy and providing some more information on advocacy principles and how Hill offices are set up and how you can get more information and stay up to date with what's going on. So starting with advocacy principles, no matter how you advocate, whether you are writing a letter or meeting a Hill office or writing an op-ed, there's a couple of principles that you want to make sure that you maintain throughout those. The first one I would say is the most important, and that is to be clear about what the issue is and what you're asking Congress to do. We refer to this as the ask, and the last thing you want to do is spend, a lot of time getting to DC and prepping for meetings and, doing all of the fun, Hill Day, walking around Capitol Hill and walk out of offices and have them say, well, they were nice, but I have no idea what they want from us. So you want to be very clear, very direct in what you're asking for. You also want to be flexible in your approach and how you talk about the issues. I would, you know what, I said the first one is the most important, but I'm going to say that this one is equally as important because you don't, you won't talk to uh, a politician on the far left in the same way that you would talk to one on the far right. They have different priorities, they have different ideas for how things should function. And so you really want to know your audience and be able to talk about, the same issue. So maybe funding for NIH in a manner that resonates with one office and then talk about it differently in a manner that resonates with that office. And so that's where doing some work ahead of time. And for those of you doing the FASEB Hill Day, we'll talk more about this in some of the other presentations. But, sometimes you can do research on an office and say, oh, wow, I'm completely surprised. I had no idea this office was really invested in such and such an issue. This is going to be a great gateway into what I'm talking about. You might, on the other hand, do some research and say, oh, well, there's not really anything specific, but I know, in general, Republicans are really interested in global competitiveness. So here's how I can tie my issue into that. So that's an important part of communicating your message and meeting your audience where they are. And then the last thing is just transparency and making sure you're clear who you are there on behalf of. So for the FASEB Hill Day, even though you are with your universities, you're advocating on behalf of FASEB, and so you want to make sure you're clear on who you're representing, that you're there on behalf of FASEB, even though you're talking about the research that you're doing at your university. Next slide, please. Just some now general information on how offices are set up. As Ellen talked about a little bit, there are offices in DC and there are offices in districts and states. And there's absolute value to meeting both of those offices. In general, most of the policy work is done in DC, and the state and district offices focus more on constituent services. Sometimes policy people are in district offices. I've had people I work with in DC move back out to, in this case, it was Alaska, and they were doing the policy work from one of the Alaska offices. There are also DC staff who will sometimes come to the district and state offices during recess. And I wouldn't look at this slide and think, oh, I want to talk policy. I can't meet with my local office. Not the case at all. As Ellen said, sometimes those people have even more time to talk with you. And we have clients who engage regularly with people in their local district offices. And then when they need to engage on a policy level, at a higher level with people in the DC office, those staff in the constituent offices are helpful in elevating their issue to the right people in the DC office. So they definitely work together, and there's value in both of those. Next slide, please. So talking specifically about the general types of staff you'll encounter in the DC office on a Hill Day. As Ellen talked about, staff, well, actually, before I get to that part, there's a lot of staff turnover and staff changes. Sometimes that is within an office of somebody, starting out in a low level position and staying in the office for 10 years. And, the next time you see them, you're running the office. Sometimes it's, moving to other offices on Capitol Hill. I think of every interaction I have with a Hill office as developing a relationship. It's not just a one-off event. You want to be a resource for that staffer, whether they're a junior staffer today and the chief of staff tomorrow. That is really a relationship that you can develop and not think of as a one-off event. So looking at the different roles in the office, the legislative correspondent is a junior position. This is somebody who's primarily researching issues and responding to constituent mail, and also attending meetings. So if you send in an email to your office saying, I'm really concerned about this issue, and you get a response back, generally that's coming from the LC. The legislative assistant is somebody who is more in on the policy piece. They're developing legislation and strategies for the policy issues that are in their portfolio. And the legislative director is, and so there are multiple LCs and multiple LAs within an office. And then there's one legislative director who kind of oversees all of the policy pieces and they establish the legislative agenda. And then the top person is the chief of staff and they're responsible for, all office functions. Next slide, please. And then, as Ellen talked about, staff portfolios cover a huge range of issues. You might be meeting with the legislative assistant who has the health portfolio. They might also have energy, environment, immigration, science, and education. And maybe they have that portfolio because they have a degree in health issues and are very familiar with that. But maybe they have that portfolio because they have a background in energy and they don't know anything about the health side of things. So it's important not to just kind of jump in assuming people know everything. They may or they may not. But again, we'll talk some more about specifics of that before the FASEB Hill Day. When you're meeting with an office, your best in with them is that you're a constituent. Members want to be reelected. They want their constituents to be happy. So that is your best in with the office. Most offices now still take virtual meetings. They'll do in person or virtual. And you may reach out to an office and not hear back. Don't take that as them being uninterested or ignoring you. Staff, under the best of circumstances, work long days and get a ton of emails. So, with how hectic things are, especially right now, as Ellen talked about, as they're, trying to wrap up spending, trying to avoid, having a shutdown in the end of the month, they're getting ready for the next spending cycle. There's just a lot going on. So, if you reach out to them and don't hear back within a reasonable time, you can reach out to them again and, acknowledge we know how busy you are, wanted to touch base on this. And then the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources that are available through FASEB. Before I jump to those, though, does anybody have any questions or any additional comments from anybody?
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, let's go on to some of these resources. So if you aren't signed up for the FASEB Hill Day, contact your member society and let them know that you're interested in upcoming Hill Days through FASEB or through the member societies. At the FASEB website, which is faseb.org, I'm going to go through some of the resources that you can see there and in terms of advocacy, and you can also follow FASEB on social media to keep updated of the activities that they're doing. Next slide, please. So one of the resources that FASEB does that's incredible that we have heard from people all over the Hill how helpful these fact sheets are is creating fact sheets for each agency and how that impacts each state. So up here you can see these are for Alabama. There's a fact sheet for NIH and how much funding that brings into the state, as well as the second one for NSF and the funding that it brings into the state, what the research looks like, universities that are supported through these funds. This is incredibly helpful information for offices to say, oh, I didn't realize, I knew NSF did a lot of work, but I didn't realize this much money was coming into our state. And so I see why we need to fund NSF. These state fact sheets are available at the website at the bottom of the page. They're available to everybody. If you are part of a FASEB member society, you also have access to district-specific fact sheets like these. Next slide, please. You can get FASEB communications in a couple of ways. There's email communication on the webpage here. Next slide, please. And there's also the Washington Update that you can subscribe to keep updated with legislative and science policy news. Next slide, please. And also, there's a whole advocacy toolkit on the FASEB page that gives you information about different ways you can advocate, how to request a meeting, planning a congressional visit, and just kind of providing you with all of the information that you need to do your outreach. Next slide, please. All right, and then the next, you can just kind of run through the next 3 slides, Jennifer. These are just some photos from the last FASEB Capitol Hill Day. And it is a great event, and looking forward to seeing those of you who are coming to that in a couple of months. So that is all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Allie. We really appreciate that, and to you and Ellen as well. So I did take down the slides so we can have more of a dialogue and a conversation with each other, but I can bring them back up if we need to refer to anything. So I'm going to not talk. Happy to open it up to questions or comments or anything you want us to review. I do have some closing comments for the end, but I will save that. Matthew, it looks like you might be trying to find your unmute button. So, or no, okay. Oh, thank
It's
you
a
now.
question in the chat. Yes.
Great. Okay, so, do we have any suggestions on whether to touch on the disruptions at NIH and NSF and their impact on the scientific workforce? I'm going to throw that to our expert panelists. Either one of you can jump in on that.
Well, I think you can certainly acknowledge the fact that this has happened and really just focus on the impact that you see. Try not to be critical because that office may have actually supported those cuts. So you have to look at it, from that point of view. You just need to be factual and try not to be emotional about it. I know it's an emotional issue and your colleagues have lost their positions, but it I think you need to really focus on the consequences, but don't spend most of your time, your discussion on this, because we're really there to ask for the top line funding levels for our agencies. And if you don't get that, all the other issues really don't matter. So that is what FASEB is going to Capitol Hill about. We want to get those top line funding numbers.
Yeah, I agree with that, and especially with what Ellen said about you need to be a little bit sensitive depending on the office, and they may or may not support that. But again, if you can make it relevant to your state, if you say we were supposed to get $5 million in funding, but because our, program officer is no longer there, that funding has been held up, and now we've had to lay off 20 people while we wait for the money to come in, or something like that. So if there's a very clear link to how it's affecting your district and your state, then absolutely do that. If you're more just generally upset and want them to know, I would stay away from that.
I think I would co-sign all of the above and also add a couple other things. So one of the challenges that the Capitol Hill faced throughout 2025, particularly with regard to the disruptions at the agencies, was not being able to get information about what was truly going on at the agencies, even when they asked. Every meeting, almost every meeting I had in 2025, Republican, Democrat, House, or Senate, I was faced with frustrated congressional aides who said, we can't get questions answered from the agencies. No one picks up the phone. No one returns our emails. The only way we know what's really happening is when you, the advocates, come on and you tell us what's going on the ground, or we read about it in Stat News or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, the way everybody else is. So that was one of the things that they're experiencing. So that office may have supported the reductions or the changes without really truly understanding what was going on. The second thing is, even as things stabilized a little bit in air quotes, agency communication staffs were decimated by the cuts and the changes in 2025, between reductions in force, the impact of the Department of Government Efficiency, and those who chose early retirement or took opportunities to leave. And they're still that way today. So the agencies themselves have been really crippled in their ability to communicate what's going on. So you may be working with or talking to someone who doesn't really have a true picture. So that's why it's really important to talk about what was the impact on your lab or locally. Again, we had to lay off. We couldn't bring on, we rescinded offers to graduate students because we didn't know what was happening. Our funding is still held up, and we don't know who to call at the agency to find out. We were unable to submit a journal article or an article for publication because of X, Y, or Z. So give them those real concrete examples so they can understand. And then they may get emotional and say, we had no idea, we're so sorry. If that happens, great, you can commiserate together. But it's got to be sort of that higher level, explained to them like they're an alien who landed from Mars and is, welcome to Earth 2025. Pretty jarring experience, right? I think that those are, I'm glad you asked this question because it's really different from the type of advocacy and what we've encountered pre 2025, to be quite honest.
All right, we do have a couple more questions in the
Great.
chat, and I just wanted them to be aired out loud. So we had the one from Jessica, and I know this is a freebie question for you all because she asked if it would be beneficial to print out the fact sheets to hand out during the meetings. She also gives mad props because they're really cool, and thank you, we appreciate that. Because that's a big investment for FASEB. So Jay-Z, take that one away or somebody.
I can take it. Absolutely, yes. So we're actually, if you're coming to the FASEB Capitol Hill Day, you will all actually already be given folders with all of those printed out. We call them the leave behind folders because you literally leave them behind in the congressional office after you're done with your meeting. So we'll have all those fact sheets in there. They will also be posted online in time for Capitol Hill Day. So if you're not analog and you're more digital and you have like an iPad or a laptop with you, you can just actually click on the link and you can show them in real time at the meeting as well too. So you will have them in both digital and analog format.
The OPA team endures many a paper cut to make sure you have your leave behind folders. All right, so the next question is a good gimme, and I'm gonna ask Ellen to tackle this one. So it comes from Alejandra. Are we going to be assigned to representatives of our own states? And how does Hill Day play out? I mean, this is a common question I get because I'll be like, oh, I participate in Hill Days. And we realize with that question that we just live and breathe this. And you might not necessarily be familiar with what a Hill Day looks like. So a little more details on that.
So when you register, you're going to be providing a work address as well as a home address. Based on that information, you will be mapped to your office, your Senate offices, your congressional representative. Teams will be assigned. We will put you together with other groups. If you are a small group, maybe there's only one person from Delaware, for example, or one person from Alaska. Well, we don't want them to go in by themselves. So we're going to probably match you with another team in a state that's close by. So you might have two states that you go to. And if you are from Alaska, you will be the one that kind of leads that meeting. That is how I work with my teams. Because again, it's better that the actual constituent be the lead when you're talking to that particular office. So you can kind of sort that out before you go into the office, and it can even be done that the morning of. But we're going to have training, more in-depth training the night before for the people that are actually going to Capitol Hill with us. So all the logistical information that you might be asking about, we will have all that. Now, after Hill Day, you're going to have an opportunity to follow up. That will be done through email. But when you go to those offices, you should be getting business cards. And I would recommend if you have a business card that you bring it too, so that you can exchange that information. The offices are not necessarily as high tech as you may think they are. People still use business cards up there. And you can follow up with an email, but you can do it through our advocacy app that will be provided to you. We're also going to ask you to kind of keep on top of give us some information in the questionnaire that will be provided to you afterwards about how the visit went, what the reaction of that office was to your ask. Did they say, oh yeah, we really support NIH, or no, we don't? Because I can tell you, the Republican Study Committee is a large Republican conservative group. They put out a budget, and in that particular budget, they have said that they do not support NIH. So if that member of Congress is a part of the Republican Study Committee, they most likely will have that in their thinking because that's what the plan is for that particular committee. So you're going to have to overcome some of that resistance. And in terms of other things that will happen afterwards, like I said, we will have opportunities for you to use our Legislative Action Center. You've got the materials from the Hill Day. you can actually go to the district office by calling that office and making an appointment. That can be done at any time throughout the year. If you do it earlier, that's fine. If you do it a little later, I would do it within the first quarter or half of the year. Because if you're going there to talk about funding, the spring is the time when all the requests are being made to the member offices by the constituents. So they're going to be hearing from tons of people all about different funding requests for different agencies for different programs. So you're going to want to be out there in front if you can be. Hard figures for, oh, sorry.
Can I add one thing?
Jump ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
With regard, since you got into some of the logistics, and this is kind of a logistics question.
Yeah.
So yes, so a couple of things you should also know regarding the congressional appointments and who you're going to meet and see. Like I said, Ellen said, we asked for your address information. To be clear, when we make these appointments, we are doing so on behalf of the FASEB member society that you are a member of. You will not be representing an academic institution. That's to keep you out of trouble at home as well, too. We are using the word constituent broadly, meaning the people that you're meeting with, the congressional offices, whether it's the member of Congress or staff. When we reach out to make those appointments, they will be told you are a constituent in that you either live or work in the district. Constituent does not mean you vote for or vote in that district or state. So that's one thing. They will have your name and information and where you're from, right? But they won't have a bio or background on you, and that's fine. They don't really know that. And they will also know what it is that you're coming in to talk to them about, because we will send ahead of time to each office a one-page sheet of information about what it is we want to talk about and what our priorities are. I cannot guarantee that the person you're meeting with will have read that, but they will have that. And we also will have an app that will be available that you do not have access to right now, but will closer to Capitol Hill Day, where we'll have all this information like our talking points, biographies on the member of Congress that you're meeting with, their recent voting record, kind of what, if they're a member of this Republican study committee that Alan talked about. So you will have all of that handy. So we will recommend that everyone bring with them either a tablet or a phone on Capitol Hill Day so they can easily access that. Oh, and a spare battery pack. We'll cover all of that later as well, too. So this has actually really led into the next question, which I'm happy to read, Yvette. And that's a great one from Becky. Do we have hard figures we will be asking for? It's actually will be for FY 2027. But Ellen, can you cover that, please?
So at our upcoming board meeting, we will be discussing what those figures should be for fiscal year 27. What you see on our website are the numbers for fiscal year 26. So basically that's all over with now. We're just trying to get legislation enacted. The numbers have already come out. So we will be discussing that at the upcoming board meeting, and there will be a new funding brochure up on the website. There will be new fact sheets also. So you will be seeing all of that, I would say, towards early March. Mm-hmm. But definitely you'll have plenty of time to read over everything before you actually go to Capitol Hill.
Yes. One thing to don't be too nervous about it. We don't expect anybody to memorize anything. That's why we'll have the handouts with all this information. In fact, I would prefer that you not, because the real impact of what we do on Capitol Hill Day and the meetings is you telling the personal stories and talking about the local impact of this, of the research funding. Because I guarantee you that the aide or the person you're meeting with, or even the member of Congress, they won't remember what you said either. They'll take notes. It's important that they take notes and write it down, but do not fear that you don't have enough time to memorize or ask, in our list of things for that we're talking about. The other thing to keep in mind too is the conversation that you have with the person you're meeting with, whether it's the aide or the member, may go in a slightly different direction, right? They may be so fascinated and interested by a story you're telling about the impact of what's going on in your lab that you never even get to talk about the exact funding figure, or you do it ever so briefly. You will have the person you're meeting with will remember you more about the personal details and personal stories. And besides, they can always follow up with you afterwards. And in fact, we will prompt you after Capitol Hill Day to send a virtual thank you note and email that will have all this information in it anyway. So just wanted to try and reassure folks that this is not something where you have to do a lot of prep for a test.
Jennifer, could I just build off of that with I had one meeting with on a FASEB Hill day where one of the members started out talking about, this very personal reason why they had started studying this health issue, and the staffer goes, "Oh, I was actually just diagnosed with that." And so, it was this very like personal moment that, unexpectedly set the tone for the rest of the meeting. And also, sorry, I made that sound really severe. It wasn't like a life-threatening thing, but it was a just a great, as Jennifer said, personal way to start it. And I also, when I first started going to the Hill, I felt like I needed to have an answer to everything that anybody could possibly ask me. So I'm like reading and maybe there's new literature that I haven't seen, looking at everything. And Jennifer's point about following up is the best. I realized that, oh yeah, if I don't know the answer, and then I can follow up with them and say, I, looked into your question and here's what I found, and here's why this relates to what we need. That's even better, because then you've answered their question and shown that you can be a good resource and taken that relationship to the next level.
That's a great point, Allie. We're going to actually dig deeper into that in the second training and in the dinner the night before, in terms of, how do you have this conversation? We're going to do some role playing and troubleshooting, based on what Ellen and Allie and I encounter in our meetings on Capitol Hill before you guys even come into Washington, D.C. So you're having real-time information about, well, what's the environment like? What's everybody's mood? What should I expect as we go into it? Definitely want to platform Nelly's comment about this helpful paper from Nature with some of the data. Please feel free to bring other resources with you for Capitol Hill Day and share those. You're not limited to just the FASEB propaganda that we give you. I use that word in the best way possible. So if you have an article or a resource, or you even have information from your own lab or your own member society, please go ahead and bring that, and you can stuff it in the folders that you leave behind. You're not restricted in any way. I would caution, though, do not bring your latest published article in Cell Science or Nature. I think that's wonderful. That's terrific. The person you're meeting with won't read it. If you've got a short summary about what it says and why it's important, then that's great as well, too. The aides on Capitol Hill, they have micro time in terms to absorb things. That's why we do things like those fact sheets, 1 page, those kinds of things. But if you have a good chart or graph or data, by all means, bring that with you as an additional advocacy tool. We just don't have the resources to pull everything together all at once for everyone. And so apply some creativity.
And Jay-Z, I know I'm not an official speaker here, but you roped me into this, so I'm going to make my voice heard. Just a reminder that we're not unleashing you on the Hill without any resources. You all have a staff guide. And so, my job when I'm a staff guide is I kind of just make sure the conversation stays on the rails, or, in case that the constituent doesn't feel comfortable, being like, hey, that's an inappropriate question. That's my job, is to pay attention to where the conversation is going and say, well, that is beyond the scope of what FASEB does. How about, and I'll turn to scientist XYZ, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing at your institution? So our job is to help diffuse any conversations that get a little spicy, or depending on the office, sometimes they may take you down a rabbit hole. My favorite thing is I look at the titles of the books on their bookshelves, because that tells you their perspective pretty quickly. And so do I need to have my spidey senses up to pivot the conversation, or is it really just going to be chill and we'll be able to control it?
And that's an excellent reminder, kind of thing. And again, we'll go over a little bit more about what to expect in the next training. This was more to sort of set the stage and the framework with the adaptations now that we've lived through 2025, and and kind of how that really has changed and shifted things.
Let me also add that the staff that you'll be meeting with, you're not going to get bios on them in the app. So you'll have to go onto LinkedIn, or you can do a Google search and try and find some information about the staff, about what schools they went to or where they've done fellowships. And I often find that on LinkedIn very easily. So you can also take a look at that. Hopefully, maybe you meet someone that came from the same school, or, has a law degree like you do. It could be, there could be a common connection there. So I would highly suggest that you actually look at their profile if you can find it online. But if you can't, that's fine too. You can still kind of, you know, assume that they definitely have a college degree. All right, they're not going to be high school, and they're probably not going to be an intern from, you know, so you can assume that base level of understanding. But like I said, you can't assume that they understand science and in scientific terms. So you'll have to talk to them in a lay language until you can establish that they have that higher degree, master's of public health or PhD in biology. You cannot speak to them at that higher level that you would do when you're in a conference with other scientists.
I think that's a very important point. And the next question I know is, well, how will I know who I'm meeting with? How do I find their names? That will be in the app. So what we will do is about a week before you travel to Washington, we will send you an email with the credentials to log in because the app is secure. And then you'll have your meeting schedule and you'll be able to see who it is that you're meeting with in each House and Senate office. So you can do like I said, some quick internet stalking to find out. And if you can't find it, don't worry about it. They may introduce. You can always ask them to introduce themselves at the beginning of the meeting and say, could you tell me a little bit about yourself? Most of the folks I meet with have their 30-second introduction down, and there's like, I'm Jane. I've worked for Senator Cruz for 2 years now. I went to school in Texas. I'm not a scientist, or my degree is in political science, kind of thing. Some of you will actually probably get a chance to meet with some of the congressional fellows sponsored by the American Association for the Advancement of Science and other organizations. If Feel free to nerd out. And my experience has been when they encounter one of you, they're just so excited to talk to somebody who's an actual scientist who came to talk to them that you start talking about it. And that's fine as well too. And you can bond over that together. So yeah, don't stress.
So there's another question in the chat. So Rodney is asking, how long should we expect the meetings to actually last? A minimum, I would say 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that's why you have to have your ask down pat. You go in there and, you can ask the staff, how long do we have with you? The staff may say, well, I'm sorry, I only have 10 minutes because I gotta go to the floor with my boss. Then you only have 10 minutes. But some of them actually go longer. Some can go to 30 minutes. So you can kind of ask that up front before you even start the discussion.
Also, and again, we'll talk more about this beforehand, but since the question has come up, I like to tell people to have your, 5-minute presentation, your 15-minute, and your 30-minute, because sometimes the staffer will come in and say, we were booked for 30 minutes, but my boss decided to attend this hearing at the last minute, so I need to go with him in 15 minutes. So it's nice to be prepared if that happens. Okay, I'm not doing it on the fly here. I have an idea for a quick presentation.
And don't be upset or offended if the meeting gets cut short a little bit. That's again why we have you connect with them via email afterwards. And they may actually respond to that email and say, what, I'd love to have a longer conversation with you. Can we put something together, kind of thing. So
one observation that I have is, in the morning, everything is going to be right down to the schedule.
Yep.
And in the afternoon, especially if you're like the last meeting that they have for the day, depending on what they have on deck, or if their member is gone or out of town or doing something else, they might just want to chill and chat. So I usually say, how's your day going? And I do the temperature check. And if they seem really strung out, I know it's going to be a short meeting. And if they're like, hey, you're my last meeting of the day, let's talk about science, and it's near and dear to my heart, I know it's going to be a little bit longer meeting.
All right, we've got about a few minutes left. Any other last minute questions or concerns? I will tell you right now, we'll clean up this recording and then we'll make sure that we send the link to everybody as well too. All right. Well, Ellen, would you like to do some closing remarks?
Just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and please share that recording. You're welcome to share with other people. It will be on our YouTube channel.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you in a couple weeks for our next training. And for those in the eye of the storm, God bless. And I hope everybody stays safe and that you have enough snacks at home. Take care.
Bye.